And we're not saying that we're right. We're just going to go through the evidence of why we believe what we believe, on why we call the moon that we're going to show at the end, or why we call it the new moon. So now we know the new moon is the beginning of the month, the first day of the month. Let's go into the second question here. What does the moon look like on the new moon? So this here is where it gets kind of iffy, where there are a lot of different doctrines out there, well, mainly 3 of them, about what the moon looks like on new moon. Some people say it's the dark moon. Some people say it's the full moon, and some people say it's the moon when it has its first light on it. Psalms chapter 81 and verse 3.
The book of Psalms chapter 81 and verse 3. Blow up the trumpet in the new moon, in the time appointed, on our solemn feast day.
Now this scripture here has a lot of words that need to be broken down in it. Like we just read Numbers 10 and 10, where it tells you all the different times that they want you to blow up the trumpet, and it says the beginning of your month, and it talks about solemn feast days and the day of your gladness. So now here we're going to read through and try to figure out what day is this talking about here. It says blow up the trumpet in the new moon in the time appointed. So first, even thinking about the word moon in Hebrew is not only just for moon, but it also means month. The same word moon means month, Kodesh. The first day of the month, the lunar month. So when reading Psalms 81 and verse 3, it could mean any of those things. It could mean the actual new moon. It could just mean month. It could mean monthly. It could mean the first day of the month or a lunar month. It doesn't necessarily mean moon. Very important. So blow up the trumpet in the new moon or the new month or the first day of the month or monthly or lunar month. Okay.
In the time appointed.
Time appointed. So we're blowing up the trumpet on the new moon or the new month in the time appointed. Let's look up time appointed in the blue letter. Time appointed, or kese, means full moon. Now this is where a lot of people get their understanding of the full moon being the new moon, because you go here, you look up the word time appointed, and it says full moon. So I can understand how you can get that and say, hey, it just said new moon, time appointed, meaning full moon. But you can't stop there. We got to keep breaking down each word here. I know it gets kind of boring. You're like, we ain't got to do all that. We just read the scripture as it is. But you got to understand this is translated out of another language.
That is very important to understand, that English is not the archaic written form of the scriptures. It is Hebrew. Different words mean different things. It's the same thing as legal jargon. Kids to us means children. When you go to court, kids don't mean children. It means goats, little baby goats and calves. Got to understand, legal or jargon when it comes to the scripture is written in Hebrew for the Old Testament and some portion of the New Testament written in Greek. Got to understand the translations of words.
So we're blowing up the trumpet in the new moon or the new month, the time appointed, meaning what? On the full moon. All right, read verse 3 one more time.
Verse 3, blow up the trumpet in the new moon, in the time appointed, full moon, on our solemn feast day.
So here is where a lot of people stop and they don't break down solemn feast day part, because they view every feast day as a solemn feast. So they go to Leviticus 23 and say every feast day that's written in there is a solemn feast, or any and every feast day is a solemn feast, which is not true. You have to go through the scriptures and find out the biblical definition of solemn feast. And not only that, it says feast day, not plural. It's talking about one particular day. In new moon, you have 12 of them.
You gotta say that part again.
New moon, you have 12. So it wouldn't say feast day. It would say feast days if it was actually talking about a new moon, unless it's talking about a particular new moon. But here it says the time appointed on our solemn feast day. So now we got to figure out what is a solemn feast according to the Bible, so that we can put this all together and come to an understanding of what is Psalms 83 truly saying. So now we're going to go to a couple of definitions, or a couple of scriptures, I should say, to find what does solemn feast day mean according to the Bible.
Deuteronomy chapter 16, verse 16.
Yep, and we're starting here so we don't have to read all of this, but if you start at verse 13, it's talking about the Feast of Tabernacles. So when we get to 15, it's still talking about Feast of Tabernacles. Okay.
Verse 15, 7 days shalt thou keep a solemn feast unto the Lord thy God in the place which the Lord shall choose. Because the Lord thy God shall bless thee in all thine increase and in all thy works of thine hands. Therefore thou shalt surely rejoice.
So here it's calling the Feast of Tabernacles a solemn feast. And now it's going to go into the 3 solemn feasts there are in a year. Come on.
Verse 16, 3 times in a year shall all thy males appear before the Lord thy God in the place which he shall choose. In the feast of unleavened bread,
Or Passover,
and in the feast of weeks,
or Pentecost, because it's 7 weeks plus a day, 50 days. Come on.
and in the feast of tabernacles. And they shall not appear before the Lord empty.
So here it said that the 3 solemn feasts in the year are unleavened bread or Passover, Pentecost, and Tabernacles. Those are the 3 solemn feasts. So somebody might say that ain't say it's solemn feast, because 15 was talking about Tabernacles, and then it kept reading, didn't say solemn feast again. So now we got to get another scripture that is saying the same thing. Let's get another witness. Let's go to Chronicles this time.
2 Chronicles chapter 8, verse 13. Even after a certain rate every day, offering according to the commandment of Moses on the Sabbaths, and on the new moons, and on the solemn feast.
All right, stop right there. I want to point that out again. I know I said it earlier, but it's very important that we see that the Bible always separates new moons from solemn feast. They're never classified the same thing. Every time you see it over and over again, there's always going to be a separation between new moon and solemn feast, showing you that they're not the same thing. It's so many scriptures over and over again throughout the Bible showing you it's always in the same verse, showing you they're not the same thing. So we have here broken down the new moon, the Sabbath, and the solemn feast. Okay.
And why are you saying this again? Understanding solemn feast in Psalms 81 is a very important word that most people don't pay attention to. You have to know there's only 3 solemn feast days in the Bible. Every day is not a solemn day. Every high holy day is not a solemn day. Every new moon is not a holy day or a solemn day. There are only 3 solemn feasts in the Bible, according to scriptures.
All right.
Verse 13.
13.
I'm sorry. Even after a certain rate every day, offering according to the commandment of Moses on the Sabbaths, and on the new moons, and on the solemn feast, 3 times in a year, even in the feast of unleavened bread, and in the feast of weeks, and in the feast of tabernacles.
So it just gave you those 3 again. The 3 solemn feasts are unleavened bread, Pentecost, and tabernacles. Those are the 3 solemn feast days. So going back to Psalms 83, Psalms 83 has to be talking about
81 and 3.
Psalms 81 in verse 3 has to be talking about one of those 3 days, because it says solemn feast. And we just went to a couple of scriptures, Numbers 10 and 10, and also there in Chronicles that it showed that new moon day and solemn feast day are not the same thing. So we know when it says in the beginning of Psalms 81 and 3 on your new moons, it's not talking about new moon day, because later on it says solemn feast. So it can't be talking about new moon day. So we would have to wonder, like, why is it saying new moon, but then later on it says solemn feast? So it had to be something particular about this moon. Remember earlier I said that moon and month is the same word. So it could be saying in the new month, blowing up the trumpet. You're like, that sounds weird, new month. But if it's the first month of the year, then I can understand why you would say new month, because hey, it's the first one of the year. It's to start off the year.
Yeah. So you should be writing these words down when it comes to new moon. You should be having a word in your notes, what that means. Time appointed. You should be having some notes, what that word means, according to the blue letter and what's written in Hebrew. And then solemn feast days. You should have 3 of them. Just to recap, you should have 3 solemn feast days. On these 3 solemn feast days, according to the previous verses or stanzas, it should say it should be a full moon. Everybody's following. It should be a full moon
on the one that is this particular feast day that it's talking about. It should be a full moon. I say that because 2 of them are on the 15th day of the month. Mm-hmm. One of them, Pentecost, is on any day because it's going to be the 50th day. So it's not going to be on the same day of the month every year. So two of these high holy days are going to be on the 15th of the month. Let's prove it first.
According to scripture.
According to scripture.
Say that.
According to scripture. Let's get that real quick. What is Leviticus 23? To show what day of the month that unleavened bread is going to be on, and then tabernacles are going to be on.
Leviticus chapter 23 and verse 6. And on the 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread unto the Lord. 7 days ye must eat unleavened bread.
So here it says the 15th day of the same month. Same month, talking about what the Abib, the first day that Passover is in. So here it says 15th day of the same month is the feast of unleavened bread. So now we just read unleavened bread is on the 15th day of the month. That's one of the solemn feast is going to be on the 15th. Right. The other one we just talked about, Pentecost, which is going to be on the 50th day after the counting of Passover, that Sabbath of the Passover. So that one can vary. So that's not going to be on the 15th. And then we're going to read tabernacles.
Leviticus 23 and 34. Speak unto the children of Israel, saying, the 15th day of this 7th month shall be the Feast of Tabernacles, for 7 days unto the Lord.
So here it said that tabernacles is on the 15th day of the month. So we just had 2 high holy days that are on the 15th day of the month, 2 solemn feast days on the 15th. And the Bible just said on that day it's going to be a full moon.
A what?
A full moon on the 15th day of the month, because it said solemn feast day. We already proved that solemn feast is not a new moon. So it's going to be on the 15th day of the month. It's going to be a full moon.
Context, because I believe the rest of this is going to tell us which solemn feast day this is talking about.
Exactly. Remember that the moon is on a cycle.
Okay.
The moon never gets off that cycle. It's going to be 29 and a half. So we just round and say 30 days a month. So it's going to continue to stay on that cycle. So being that Pentecost is going to vary, it's not going to be in the same day. The moon is not going to look on us every year. The moon is not going to look the same. But on unleavened bread and tabernacles, the moon is going to always look the same, because the moon doesn't get off that cycle. So on the 15th day of the month, it's going to be full according to the scriptures that we've gone through, that we see at this time. Trying to be politically correct.
Yeah, you got to, man. You got to.
All right, so now we're going to keep reading so we can figure out which one, because we just figured out that Psalms 81:3 is talking about one of those 3 feast days. We already can X out Pentecost because it's not going to be on the same day every year. So we can X that out. So now we're narrowed down to 2 solemn feasts that Psalms 81:3 could be talking about. So now we're going to keep reading to see if there's some evidence in the rest of the chapter. All right.
Verse 4. For this was a statute for Israel and a law of the God of Jacob.
Come on.
This he ordained in Joseph. Verse 5. This he ordained in Joseph for a testimony when he went out through the land of Egypt, where I heard a language that I understood not.
So here it's saying that it was ordained in Joseph for a testimony when he led him out of Egypt. So what particular day have we gone over that deals with being led out of Egypt?
The book of Numbers, chapter 33, and verse 1. These are the journeys of the children of Israel, which went forth out of the land of Egypt with their armies under the hand of Moses and Aaron. And Moses wrote their goings out according to their journeys by the commandments of the Lord. And these are their journeys according to their goings out.
So this sounds kind of familiar to what we just read about leaving Egypt. We just read in Psalm chapter 83. Come on.
And they departed from Ramses in the first month on the 15th day of the first month.
So they left out of Egypt on the 15th day of the first month. Come
on the morrow after the Passover, the children of Israel went out with a high hand in the sight of all the Egyptians.
So here is giving you a lot of information. It's telling you that unleavened bread or Passover, they left on the 15th day, and that was the day after the Passover. So the 15th was the day after the Passover. That was the next day. And here we just read that the next day was the 15th. That's when they left, on the 15th. And it just talked about Moses and Aaron and leaving out of Egypt. Sound very similar to what we just read in Psalms 81 and 3, when we're trying to figure out what day is this solemn feast day that it's talking about.
Which was the morning. I just want to make sure it was the morning. Okay.
All right, so we're going to keep reading and see if there's a little bit more information in Psalms 81.
Read it over again, verse 4. For this was a statute for Israel and a law of the God of Jacob. Verse 5. This he ordained in Joseph for a testimony when he went out through the land of Egypt, where I heard a language that I understood not.
So that's surrounding Passover and unleavened bread when they were leaving out of Egypt on the 15th day of the month. Okay.
Verse 6. I removed his shoulder from the burden. His hands were delivered from the pots.
So that burden was what? Being in captivity for over 400 years. That's when the Most High, removed that burden from the children of Israel. They became a free people again and able to marry him. And he be their God. Okay.
You also can read Leviticus 23 and you can see which new moon is God's high holy day.
Yes, because there is one that is a high holy day. Not a solemn feast, but a high holy day. We're saying that because why all the other new moons are not high holy days, because they're not mentioned in Leviticus 23. Only one new moon, which is the Feast of Trumpets. So there's a breakdown that the Feast of Trumpets is the day that it's talking about here. But the Feast of Trumpets is a new moon, not a solemn feast. And we've gone through the scriptures to prove that new moon days and solemn feasts are always separated. Also, it is not a solemn feast, but there are only 3. And one gets eliminated because it's not on the same day each year. It's not on the same day. So we only have 2 left to choose from. Either Psalms 81 and 3 is talking about unleavened bread, or it's talking about tabernacles. And what we just read proved it's talking about unleavened bread.
Written in context, it tells you that it's talking about unleavened bread.
So the scripture itself is not even talking about new moon day. It's talking about the first month of the year when the Most High brought us out of Egypt on a full moon.
Context.
And we're blowing up a trumpet on that day.
It's a beautiful thing when you're not reading into the text, but just read the text and follow along. Understand the transliteration of words, put it together. It makes perfect sense.